She was just the nanny, that's all. A simple woman from the outskirts with a strong accent and calloused hands. But when he saw what his son, who barely spoke, had learned from her, he fell to his knees and realized the real problem was never autism. It was his own ego. This is not just the story of an autistic boy. It is also the story of a man who thought love could be bought and that everything that didn't fit his success manual was disposable. But it is also the story of something only a child's pure gaze can teach, that the soul sees what pride pretends not to. Eduardo Valverde, 47 years old, financial sector businessman, stern, perfectionist, always in a suit. He had money, he had status, but he didn't have time. My son will study at the best schools, have the best treatments, the best therapies. I pay for that. And whoever pays, rules. The son, Davy, was 6 years old and had a clear diagnosis. Severe autism. Nonverbal. Eduardo's wife, Camila, tried to keep balance. But with her husband always absent and judgmental, the pressure was crushing. Then help came from the least expected place. A new nanny, recommended by a neighbor, Maria das Dores, 54 years old from the Northeast, mother of 3. Maria arrived humbly, a woman who had raised half the world. And even without a degree, she had a rare intelligence, the intelligence of the heart. But Eduardo looked at her with contempt from the start. You don't have a degree in pedagogy? No technical course? And you want to take care of my autistic son? Maria just smiled simply. I don't have papers, no sir, but I have listening, he snorted. Listening doesn't change a diagnosis. In the first days, Davy stayed the same as always. Isolated, repetitive, no eye contact. But Maria didn't care. She didn't try to force him. She was just there. She sat on the floor with him the way no one else did, sang old songs softly, made sand drawings, created repeated gestures, not to force language, but to enter his language. While Eduardo worked 14 hours a day, she spent her time whispering stories to a boy who seemed not to hear, but he heard with his eyes. One morning, Eduardo noticed something strange. Davy, who before avoided any physical contact, was leaning on Maria's shoulder, dozing off. The father looked from the door, incredulous, but said nothing. The next day, arriving late from work, he heard laughter. Davy was laughing, loudly. Maria made faces with a mirror, and he repeated, delighted. It's not possible, Eduardo murmured. This boy never reacted like this, not even with a specialist therapist. But instead of acknowledging it, he felt uneasy. She must be exaggerating. She's not a professional. It's luck. Days later, Eduardo made a silent decision. He called his wife into the office. Camila, this nanny has gone too far. She's creating too much attachment. This can interfere with the clinical treatment. Camila hesitated. But Eduardo, Davy is different. He's more present. That's your enthusiasm. She may be well-intentioned, but she's an amateur. The next day, Eduardo called an agency and requested another caregiver, more qualified. Maria overheard from the hallway, said nothing, just wiped a tear, and kissed Davy's forehead. The morning Maria left, Davy stood by the door, not understanding. He stayed there for 2 hours, motionless, and for the first time with still awkward mouth, he spoke one word, a single word, Maria. And that's when Eduardo, upon hearing it, froze. What? He spoke? Camila fell to her knees, crying. The boy that doctors said might never speak had spoken. And it wasn't Daddy, nor Mommy. It was Maria. Eduardo stood before his son, motionless. Repeat, please. Repeat, son. But Davy was already silent again. The speech had been a breath, a brief miracle. But for Camila, it was enough to dissolve months of frustration. She held her husband's hands. Eduardo, do you understand now what you did? He didn't answer. Went upstairs to his office, locked the door. And for the first time in many years, he cried. But it wasn't the cry for a mistake. It was the cry of a man who saw pride crumble before love. In the following days, the new caregiver, highly trained specialist in special education, moved into the house. She had an extensive resume, polished speech, impeccable posture, but she didn't have time to sit on the floor. Nor did she listen to Davy's micro-expressions. She made cold notes, kept schedules, instructed efficiently. But Davy regressed. He isolated again, avoided eye contact, emitted repetitive grunts. That breath of light Maria had lit started to fade, and Eduardo knew it. Every time he looked at his son, he remembered that word said with effort, Maria. 3 weeks later, Camila took courage and called Maria. She answered with a sweet voice, but with some distance. Mrs. Camila, I'm fine, you know. I got another job, taking care of an elderly bedridden lady. It's calmer here. Camila tried to explain, apologize, invite her for coffee, but Maria seemed firm. You were very good to me, but I'm not a woman to go where I'm not welcome. It was like a knife to Camila's chest, she cried, and Eduardo heard from the hallway. For the first time, he had no ready excuse, nor a logical argument. just an emptiness that hurt like raw regret. One night, while the parents argued upstairs, Davy came down the stairs alone, which was rare. He held a sheet of paper. It was a drawing, made by him with scribbles and crooked lines. Camilla knelt down. "What is this, son?" Davy pointed to the drawing with his little finger. In the middle of the sheet, there was a figure with a dress and tied-up hair holding a flower, and beside it, with crooked childish letters, was written, Maya, his way of writing, Maria. Camilla burst into tears, and it was at that moment Eduardo made his decision. Next morning, he got up early. He personally went to the neighborhood where Maria lived. He didn't send a driver, didn't call ahead. He knocked on the door with sweaty hands. Maria opened, raised her eyes, surprised. Eduardo took off his hat as if at a funeral. "Mrs. Maria, I came to ask for forgiveness, and it's not just for you, it's for my son too." She remained silent. Eduardo continued, "I never understood what you did, because I always measured value by what is studied, earned, worn. But my son saw you with the soul, and I, with prejudice." Maria lowered her eyes. "I'm not better than anyone, sir, but when we see an isolated child, we learn to speak to God in silence." Eduardo took a small box from his pocket. Inside, there was a gift wrapped in light blue paper. "Davy made this with the help of his mother. It's for you." Maria opened it. It was a handmade necklace with colorful beads and a small metal plate. On it was engraved, "First word, first friend." Maria cried, and for the first time, Eduardo smiled without arrogance, with humility. But the story was far from over. Maria arrived at the house with timid steps. There was no pomp, no reception, only the tense silence of a family on the edge of guilt. Davy was upstairs, isolated since lunch. Eduardo opened the door and spoke softly. "He's in the room, but he hasn't let anyone in, not even his mother." Maria just nodded, and without saying a word, she went upstairs. Each step seemed like a new beginning. Upon reaching the door of the room, she knocked lightly twice. Nothing. Then she sat on the hallway floor and began to sing softly the same melody she used to hum when he got restless. "Sleep, little one, dream of the sea. The world out there will wait for you." Minutes later, the door creaked slowly, and the boy smiled. The new caregiver, Luisa, watched everything from the kitchen. She was efficient, trained, spoke with authority, but there was something she did not understand, and it bothered her deeply. Why did that simple woman manage what she, with all her diplomas, couldn't? "It's not possible," she murmured. She went to Camilla and said in a defensive tone, "I need to say, this could confuse the child. He was creating a routine with me." Camilla looked at her with teary eyes. "He just wants someone who speaks his language, and that language you don't learn in college." Luisa resigned the next day. That night, Eduardo watched Maria and Davy from the top of the stairs. She was sitting with him on the carpet. They were playing with modeling clay, but it was more than that. Maria said, "This one here is blue, sky blue, just like what you like to look at." And Davy responded with a happy murmur, "Blue." Eduardo felt a lump in his throat. He, who considered himself a present father by providing everything, was beginning to realize that he had never really looked at his son. He only saw symptoms, never saw feelings. A few days later, while tidying the living room, Maria forgot a small notebook on the shelf. It was her diary. Camilla found it and unintentionally read a page. And what she read took her breath away. "Davy doesn't need the world to understand him. He needs a world that waits for him. Every gesture of his is a door, and if we are patient, he invites us in." Camilla took the diary to Eduardo. "Read this. Maybe you need this more than he does." The next morning, Eduardo gathered courage and spoke to Maria. "You have patience. But aren't you angry with me for what I did, the way I treated you?" Maria calmly lifted her eyes. "Mr. Eduardo, men like you were taught to be tough, to measure value with a ruler. But sometimes the ruler is crooked." Silence. She continued, "Your son is trying to teach you to live with the heart." And in that moment, Eduardo realized Maria wasn't just the nanny. She was a messenger of listening, a living reminder that love doesn't shout, it whispers. That night, Eduardo entered Davy's room for the first time in months. He sat on the floor, said nothing, just stayed there next to his son. Davy looked at him, touched his face with his little fingers, and murmured something new. "Dad." Eduardo choked, cried silently, and knew that right there, in that moment, a new man was born. In the days following that moment in the room, Eduardo began to do something he had never done before. Listen, not to respond, not to judge, but to understand. He started to observe his son with different eyes. He noticed how Davy trembled at loud noises, how he avoided direct touch, but calmed down with the scent of his mother's shirt, how he communicated with his eyes. Even when his mouth was silent, it was as if the whole world was shouting. And Davi lived inside a closed piano, playing soft chords that almost no one heard. The first time Eduardo tried to tell him a story, he stammered, froze, gave up. Maria, who was watching from afar, came closer. You don't need to tell it with words. Tell it with gestures. And that's how the father, who was always in a hurry, learned to wait for a comma that came after 5 minutes of silence. One morning, Davy's school sent a psychologist to the house. Camilla thought it was just another adaptation requirement. But the specialist's words surprised everyone. Davy's behavior has changed drastically in the last weeks. He is more connected, more attentive. He even smiled when we talked about the house. Eduardo remained silent. The psychologist continued. We want to understand what changed, because this is rare in cases like his. Something significant happened inside here. Maria, who was in the kitchen, listened with a dish towel in her hands. She said nothing, but smiled quietly. Camilla replied with a choked voice. What changed was that for the first time we started to see him. On a rainy afternoon, Davy surprised everyone. He entered the living room holding something in his hands, a folded piece of paper. He approached Maria and without saying a word, handed it to her. Upon opening it, she saw a childlike drawing. 2 figures holding hands, one small and one bigger. Above them, a huge sun, and below, written in crooked letters, I and Marie. She burst into tears. Camilla put her hand on Eduardo's shoulder. Our son is speaking, in his own way, but he is. And Eduardo, swallowing the emotion, murmured, and she was the dictionary that taught us to translate. One night, Maria said goodbye earlier to the couple. She said she needed to visit someone. Curious, Camilla and Eduardo decided to discreetly follow her. She went to a small house in the outskirts, knocked on the door. An older woman opened. Hi, Mom. From the back of the house, a little girl of about 10 ran out. Mommy, Maria hugged her tightly. Eduardo watched this with a tight feeling in his chest. The woman who had healed so many wounds in that house had her own hidden scars. On the way back, he waited for her at the gate. Do you have a daughter? Maria nodded, eyes teary. Yes, but I can't raise her full-time. The work, the distance. I do what I can, but it's hard. Eduardo was silent for a moment. Then he said, From now on, you will raise her here. She's welcome. It's the least I can do for everything you have already done for us. Maria tried to refuse, but Camilla was already crying. Please, Maria, let us be family too. That night, they all sat at the table. Maria, her daughter, Camila, Eduardo, and Davi among them. They laughed, ate, told stories. For the first time, the house was full of voices that were heard, not just listened to. At the end of dinner, Davy pointed to Maria and said, Marie is home. And at that moment, everyone understood. Home is not where you live, it's where the soul rests. And Maria had been the home they were all looking for. While everyone laughed, Eduardo discreetly grabbed his phone and typed a message. I need to organize a tribute. This woman changed my entire family's life, and the world needs to know this. The next day, Maria received a formal invitation. You have been nominated for the Citizen of Honor Award of the city for transforming lives with dignity, silence, and love. That morning, Maria woke up early. Didn't know exactly what to expect, even with the formal invitation in hand. Camilla had chosen a simple dress for her, and Maria's daughter, now living in the house, held her hand, smiling. When they arrived at City Hall, there was a crowd, cameras, journalists, representatives of schools and social institutions. But what caught Maria's attention was seeing Davi holding a small flower, waiting for her next to Eduardo. He slowly approached, extended the flower, and said with effort, syllable by syllable, You taught me the sound of my soul. Maria knelt down, hugged him, and there, flashes, microphones, and applause no longer mattered. Only that gesture, only that phrase, and everything made sense. On stage, the mayor handed her the medal, read a simple biography, but it was clear he didn't know half the story. Then Eduardo asked for the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, what this woman did for my family, no university, no position, and no diploma could have done. He swallowed hard and continued. She didn't just take care of my son, she healed my arrogance. She taught me that autism is not a defect, it's another way. She showed me that sometimes those who speak least understand the most, and that true educators don't enter classrooms, they enter hearts. The entire audience stood up applauding. Maria cried softly, holding her daughter's hand with a strength that mixed gratitude, relief, and belonging. On the way back home, already at night, Eduardo watched the sky through the car window. Davi was leaning on his shoulder, sleeping. Maria, at the wheel, drove calmly. You know, Maria, Eduardo said, I spent my life trying to build an empire, but it was only when I saw the way you looked at Davi that I realized the most important empire is the one we build inside a heart that no one heard. Maria smiled with her eyes. And Camilla, moved, added, You're not just the woman who taught our son. You're the woman who taught us how to be father and mother." A few months later, Eduardo opened an institute to support autistic children and their families, funded with his own resources and named Maria de Luz Institute. Yes, Luz, because that's what Maria lit in everyone there. She became the director of the project, bringing her human, simple, and transformative way of caring to hundreds of families. Davy started attending the place with other children, and one day, spontaneously during an activity, he wrote on a poster, "Everyone has a sound. They just need someone to stop and listen." And on that poster, all the months of tears, transformations, and discoveries were summed up. The world always thought Maria was just an employee, but deep down she was a tuner of souls out of tune from neglect. While many educate with shouting, she educated with silence. While others measure progress with report cards, she measured it with hugs. And in the end, it wasn't Davy who needed to learn to speak. It was the world that needed to learn to listen. If this story touched your heart, now is the perfect moment. Leave your like. It really helps to bring this content to more people. Subscribe to the channel because here, every story is a reminder that there is still beauty in the human being. And take advantage of the video appearing on the screen right now. It will also touch your soul. Click and stay with us. See you in the next video. And never forget, sometimes the greatest teachers in life come in silence and change everything without saying a single word.